The Castlevania adventure, released in 1989 for the Game Boy, was one of the first attempts to bring the famous Castlevania series to a portable platform. The game follows Christopher Belmont, an ancestor of Simon Belmont, who must face Count Dracula and his dark forces in a simplified but recognizable version of the series' classic gameplay. The game consists of 4 levels, each with a distinctive theme and a final boss. Gameplay focuses primarily on platforming and combat with traditional enemies from the series, such as bats, knights, and undead creatures. Unlike the home versions of Castlevania, the Castlevania adventure features a slower, more methodical pace of gameplay, likely due to the Game Boy's hardware limitations. Christopher moves somewhat slowly, which requires players to carefully plan their movements and attacks. Christopher's main weapon is the whip, which can be upgraded up to 3 levels. The first stage is a leather whip, which can be upgraded by collecting power-ups along the way. At the 3rd level, the whip emits a long-range energy projectile, greatly improving the player's offensive capabilities. However, an interesting aspect is that, if the player takes damage, the whip can degrade by 1 level, making combat more difficult and introducing a resource management dynamic during gameplay. The game is known for its high difficulty, mainly due to Christopher's limited mobility and the precision required in jumping and fighting. Some platforming segments, particularly those that include moving platforms or sections with deadly spikes, can be extremely frustrating for players, especially considering that Christopher has no ability to change direction in the air once a jump is made. This creates a dynamic of trial and error, where players must learn level patterns to overcome seemingly insurmountable obstacles. Furthermore, the game does not include the secondary weapons typical of the series, such as the holy water, the boomerang, or the other gadgets present in Castlevania for NES. This design choice makes combat more whip-focused and less varied, limiting the player's tactical options. Graphically, the Castlevania adventure makes the most of the Game Boy's limited capabilities, with relatively large and detailed sprites for Christopher and his enemies. However, the frame rate suffers in some areas, especially when the screen is crowded with enemies or effects. The level design, although simple in comparison to the console games, manages to evoke the gothic atmosphere typical of the series through the use of dark architecture and spooky settings. The soundtrack, composed by Hidehiro Funaki, is one of the most appreciated aspects of the game. Despite the audio limitations of the Game Boy, the music manages to maintain the dark and dramatic tone of the series, with tracks that, although less elaborate than the console versions, remain catchy and memorable. Some songs, such as the first level's theme, were praised for their ability to balance tension and adventure.
The Castlevania adventure for Game Boy, launched in 1989, is a portable version of the famous Gothic universe, a real leap of faith for its time, which brought the vampire hunter to black and white. With Christopher Belmont replacing Simon, the game introduced a slower, more methodical challenge than the fixed console iterations. The game mechanics, characterized by thoughtful movements and an inertia that made each jump a moment of tension, accentuated the sense of vulnerability and isolation. The lack of color shades reinforced the dark and disturbing mood, while the intricate levels, full of enemies and traps, tested reflexes and patience. An interesting innovation was the whip upgrade system, which could evolve or be reduced in power if the player took damage, introducing a risk-reward dynamic that pushed for greater caution. While the slow gameplay was criticized by some, the unique style and minimalist soundtrack, with catchy themes adapted to the Game Boy's sound chip, created a memorable experience. In essence, the Castlevania adventure was not just a game, but a sort of pocket Gothic nightmare, where every step could be the last.
Upon its release, the Castlevania adventure received mixed reviews. On the one hand, it was a significant achievement to bring such a game to a portable platform, but on the other, the gameplay limitations, slow movement, high difficulty, lack of secondary weapons, made it a frustrating experience for many. However, for fans of the series, it remains an important chapter that, despite its flaws, managed to transpose the gothic atmosphere and characteristic gameplay of Castlevania to the Game Boy. In summary, the Castlevania adventure is a title that, despite suffering from the technical limitations of the hardware, manages to capture part of the essence of the series, offering a challenging and memorable experience, especially for the most avid fans.